Hi Ben, how you doing?
Hi.
And welcome back everyone to Haunted Hearsay. I posted on the Haunted Hearsay Facebook page 2 days ago. Did anyone know the connection between the Beatles and fairy curses and ghosts and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and Eric Clapton? Well, the connection is, of course, I'd say most people will know it is Paddy Boyd, and it is a shameless plug for the story that we're going to do because it has very little to do with the story that we're going to do. It was just happenstance when I was told that it was her family and that there was a big deal made about her marrying one of the Beatles back in the 60s, and because people knew her father and her mother and knew the family, etc. Also, I just what I discovered actually when I came on that is that she's a direct descendant of James II of Scotland,
Hmm.
and
Where did Eric
these
Clapton come in?
direct descendant. And the reason I know it, done a bit of digging into it, and the reason that I know that is that her ancestor, who hold on, I have these written down because you know me and my name's Thomas Boyd, and Thomas Boyd in 1467 married Mary Stuart, Princess of all Scotland, daughter to James II. And on the occasion of their marriage, James II presented Thomas Boyd with a silver salver that must have been inscribed with something. I don't know.
Like,
There's no record of what it says, but it was passed down from father to son, father to son, father to son, and it stayed in the Boyd family right up until, hold on, John Boyd, born 1739. It was passed to him, and he went on to become High Sheriff of Donegal, 1772 to 73, and he bought Ballymacool House from the Span family. And that was, sorry, I beg your pardon, 1798. I
because
haven't been able to find out much about
Boyd
them now, but he bought the house from them. And the reason I know they're direct descendants because this salver was passed down father to son, father to son. So he arrived in Donegal with this salver that had been passed, been in his family at that stage for nearly 300 years or over 300 years, and it stayed in the family right up until 1921. And in the early 20s, the 1920s, the house was actually commandeered by Irish Republican soldiers, and it was occupied during the actual troubles then. And the silver salver was stolen during that occasion, and it's never been found. It's never turned up again after being in their family like from 1497. So that's how we know they're direct descendants because it was passed father to son, father to son, father to son. Now that's really the only connection that there is with Patty Boyd and.
what about Eric Clapton?
Oh, it's just that she married him
Oh, she married him.
after George Harrison, and he wrote two songs about her. He wrote, the song "Wonderful Tonight" and "Layla." They were written about. Patty Boyd was like a style icon. She was like the supermodel of her day for the '60s, and people in Letterkenny laid claim to her because her parents had been from Letterkenny.
Okay.
So, and I also discovered that it wasn't the Boyds. There's 20 acres of the oldest woodland in Europe is on that estate, and with all sorts of fairy curses and everything attached to it. But I was very intrigued by the fact that it was the oldest woodland in Europe. There's only a handful of places, and I think this place in Donegal by Letterkenny, that site, was one of the few places with the original woodland. All of Ireland would have been covered in woodland originally, going
Yeah.
right back 5,000 years. Over the centuries, it's all been taken away. There are patches, but very, very few patches. And
Yeah.
in this woodland, it was very special, not only because of the curses and the fairy folklore attached to it, but because it had trees that were very rare, even for the 1700s. Very rare conifers. There was sequoias. There was, hold on, let me see, I have it written down here. There was a couple of Latin name trees that I've never actually heard of before, and one of them is a Wellingtonia, and they're still there. There was only part of the woodland that was actually cut down, and that wasn't done until the 1940s, the mid 40s, and that was after the Boyds they sold up in 1941 and moved to England. So it was after them. The Boyds had actually, when they were told, whenever their ancestor back in the late 1700s bought the land, he was told not to alter the woods
Yeah.
because of the fairy folklore.
Do
And
they own
people,
the land now?
pardon?
Do they own that land now?
No, no, no. The Boyds sold it. Went out of the Boyd family in 1941, And I'd say they were probably out of it maybe a couple of years before that as well, the fact that it was occupied at various times. So they had sold up and gone to England. The land then was sold off to developers and contractors. So there's still the actual avenue. It's now the entrance to the housing estate, but it was the avenue up to the old house. Now the old house still exists, but it's in the middle of this housing estate. There's also family members buried on the land, but no one seems to know where, apart from one of the boys. But the thing is, we can't narrow down, is he the one that was High Sheriff?
Yeah.
There was a pact. It's the story that Regina was telling, and apparently he was quite ruthless in evicting people off his land and things like that, or was in charge of evictions, that sort of thing. Now I don't know the whole story behind it, but it was something to do with him moving there and buying that land from the Span family, with his young bride and having his son, and some tragedy befell them, but it's very hard to find out what the details were. But apparently he became a very hardened and cruel master, as it were, of his estate. So there's family members apparently are buried on the estate, but it was never acknowledged by the church. It's not sanctified ground. So you come forward. I don't know. I'm saying it's him. It might not be him. It could have been one of his descendants. But to all intent and purposes, it seems that it probably was him that that decided he would be buried with his family on the estate, and the bishop at the time in Letterkenny wouldn't allow it, and so he made a pact with his butler. And what he did is he shot his horse and he shot himself, and especially a suicide would never have been allowed on sanctified ground back in the 1700s, or the early 1800s at that stage. And the butler buried them. But the only thing to mark that grave, and it's still there, it's actually in behind houses. There's no actual access. You'd have to go up the back of somebody's house to get to this field. And it's just a cross with a wee wire fence around it. Now, I don't know if there's anything written in the cross because I've never seen it personally.
I'll have to go.
Pardon?
We'll have to go see the cross.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, at the moment, unfortunately, with COVID and us still being in the restrictions up until the 1st of December, we can't go gallivanting off around the county and go places. But it's just so interesting, because the fact that his family were buried and none of it on sanctified ground, is this why the estate is haunted? Or has it anything to do with when it was occupied by soldiers during the uprising back into the sort of late teens, early 20s? Is it something to do with things that happened then? There's so much history attached to this house, and it is definitely one of the oldest houses in Donegal. But the fact that there's still it was in the mid 40s to late 40s, and it was whoever bought the land off the Boyds that cut down part of the forest and brought the fairy curse upon them.
Oh.
And apparently had no luck after that. And the
It wasn't
estate basically, no, it wasn't a Boyd. It was after them. As I say, they sold up in 1941. So it was whoever bought it after that that decided to cut down part of the forest to develop it. And there was all sorts of bad luck befell this person. And this estate was actually well known through Europe for having beautiful gardens, to having the oldest woodland. It was a very grand estate with fabulous big gardens. It's in an area in Donegal that's actually quite sheltered. You know Donegal yourself. We live in Ireland. There's very little shelter anywhere in Ireland, but it is in a sort of pocket in between the hills where it is sheltered, so you can understand how these rare trees, etc., were able to grow there. But it being the last few remaining of their kind, going back 500-600 years, they've been there in Europe, and now there's not many left in Europe like them. I was very surprised to hear that, actually. And I've seen beautiful big trees out there, but even like the likes of the sequoia and the Wellingtonia, you wouldn't imagine that we have the climate here for them. But obviously, once upon a time, all those trees were here.
Nature.
But it's we need to go into it, because as when we were listening back to the interview with Regina, we need to get to speak to her cousin that lives further up the estate, and I'd love to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'd love to hear from anyone else that lives in the estate. There's bound to be other people that live closer to where this cross is. Yeah. We don't know where the other bodies are buried in the estate, but there's a good chance that there's houses built over them now, because there's only the actual house and the immediate grounds around the house and the outbuildings that are still there. So even the entrances, there's no entrance up to the house now anymore. It's like sitting in the middle of this housing estate, this big monolith, beautiful old building. It's such a shame that it was, that it wasn't developed and turned into a museum or something. I mean, a property that's there since we don't know when it was built. We know the Span family owned it before the Boyds, and that was back into the early 1700s. But how long they owned it and how long it was
It
built
doesn't
before
look
that.
very, very old. I mean, it looks sort of 1700s. You know, it doesn't look.
Yeah, I don't imagine it'll be much more before that. But I
No.
would be interested to find out who the Span family were and when it was built.
Mm.
I mean, there's definitely a lot more history to it because it's the woods in particular that would have been. So it was expensive land, even when it was bought in the mid to late 1700s. It was expensive land, even by today's standards. Then,
Yeah, I want to know what makes it so active. Like,
I'd say anything
it could be a
from.
curse or
Well,
whatever,
I mean,
but like,
yeah, anything from maybe the High Sheriff being a bit of a bad one to
mm,
burying his family on the actual land, and they weren't buried in
just one
sanctified wet
ghost,
ground.
is it loads of ghosts?
Yes, then it was occupied during the War of Independence, and there would have been people fought and killed there. Also, as I say, we don't know about the Span family. There could have been a previous history to it, but
Mhm.
we do know that the woods predate any other woods in Europe and have folklore going back just as long. So, I mean, where the origins of that folklore came from, your guess is as good as
Was there
mine.
any
But I believe,
battles?
I believe in the fairies. So.
Were there any battles done up there?
There most likely was. That's what I mean. But that would have been in the 20s. But there could have been back into the 1700s. You don't know.
Yeah, even earlier. Like,
Yeah,
yeah, it's fascinating. I, I was
I'd say
like,
there's all different reasons for that being haunted, and it's no one particular thing. But I'd say it's definitely more so. I mean, if he was buried on the estate, and again, maybe he's been wandering that estate to find his family since he was buried there,
you never
and
know.
has just got more bitter in spirithood, or I
Regina
don't
doesn't
know.
seem too scared. She's very level-headed about it.
But do you know something? If you were living in a situation like that, you have to be. I remember, as I've said before, the last house that I was in, there were several things happened, and I just switched off. I just didn't acknowledge them. I knew they were happening, and I've talked about them now since. But when I was living there was no talking about it. It was just, yep,
On it.
I'm just not acknowledging that. I'm not going down that road because I had a wee boy living in the house with me, and I just had to focus on him and go to work, etc. I can understand that
Yeah, no,
because it would do
be
your
so
head in.
with a poltergeist if I could do anything to avoid it.
Well, the fact that the cousin, that him and his partner were standing and there was a can flung at them and it was done during the day.
That's a different house. And then there was another neighbor.
Yeah,
The neighbor had other stuff in their house.
exactly.
And
And I
ridiculous.
don't want to scare anybody going into the estate or anything like that. But that house in front of where the cross is seems to be for rent on a very regular basis. So it would be interesting to know if there's anything ever happened in there. Maybe we've got a restless spirit that can't find his family, and but we don't know. It could be so much. It just takes. We need to investigate a lot more, and it's going to include having to go to the house and find out as much as we can. There seems to be more available in local folklore. If you go on like national archives and things like that, there's not as much available because these stories are just, people knew such and such that lived up the road that knew such and such. So, but there is a lot available in local folklore about the house and certainly about the hauntings and things like that. But yeah, we have to go and experience it for ourselves. Definitely.
Did you think it had a weird vibe when you were there?
Oh, absolutely. Oh my goodness, absolutely. I was actually relieved the last day that we went up to the entrance of it and I took the pictures of the outbuildings. And I was relieved that I didn't have on the right shoes to walk around there on my own. Because I thought, I think when I do go, I'm going to have a torch. I'm going to make sure my phone's fully charged.
You're going in the dark anyway.
Pardon?
Hopefully you won't need a torch. You don't need to go in the dark.
I'll be going during the day. I don't think I'll be going into any of the buildings. I don't even know if I can go now because I think all the appointments in Letterkenny, my mum was reading in the newspaper today, have been cancelled, all outpatient appointments, etc. So
There you go.
I
Well,
probably won't get out to Letterkenny before the 1st of December, which is freaking a lot of people out. I mean, it's likes of my mum and things like that are having to do their shopping online. I've never had to do that before. We're not got that buzz going that we would have had last year. I love the build up to Christmas.
Mm.
Christmas Day itself is a bit of an anticlimax at time, but I love the build up. And this year we don't seem to have the same build up, so we'll have to get a bit more festive starting next week or the week after, and get some Christmas ghoulies into our stories and Christmas ghosts and Krampus stuff.
Trampies.
Krampus some stuff.
Scary Christmas tales.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm fond of the old Christmas tales. I've
and
kind
there's plenty. Sorry, I'm constantly interrupting you. As you know, I'm
all right. I'm used
hard of hearing. So listen, Ben, I've thoroughly enjoyed our chat again this evening. I think we've got a long way to go with Ballymacool House.
we
As I
sh-
say, I hope everyone enjoyed the sort of connection. It really genuinely was a shameless plug to get you to listen, but it was true. It was a real connection. It's another example of that 6 degrees of separation. You can all, if you pick something, you can nearly always find your way, isn't it? It's really
yeah.
weird the way that works out sometimes, but it is actually true. So yeah. Well, I enjoyed that, Ben. So when we're
Yeah.
back Tuesday, and we're going to have a lot more info, hopefully, to do with Ballymacool House and ghostly goings on, and we're going to see who we can get talking to regarding the poltergeist activity in their house and hear their stories. So I'm glad you. I hope you all enjoyed Regina's interview. I certainly did. I know Ben did, and hopefully we'll see you all again on Tuesday. Good night, everybody. Thank you for joining in.